Howdy. Friday's lesson. We've been talking about the 1960s and early 70s. We've talked about the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, big heavy stuff like peace protests and everything else. We've taken a look at stuff like the hippie movement. We took a look at the space race. But I would not be doing justice if I didn't talk to you kids about the cars of the 60s and 70s. You know, I'm always telling you our music was better. And that can be debated. I think each generation's music speaks to itself. But I don't know if any of you guys can argue with me this, but I say the cars back in the 60s and 70s in this era were the best in American history. That's right, this is the muscle car era. The era when cars moved, roared, and it was a beautiful time. Taking a look at, first off, really the pony car. That would be the Ford Mustang of 1964. It's a small car. It's a lighter car with a heavy performance engine, and it could really move. But it got the country's attention. I mean, Mustangs, 64, 65, 66, Mustangs are really big. Now, when I talk about muscle car, now a muscle car is going to be an American two-door car. It'll have a big engine, and it'll be what's called a stock car. It's right off the line, a production car. But these were cars that were meant to move. Cars that were meant to have pickup. And when you heard those big engines, they growled. But what did we care about it? Gas prices back then. God, I remember putting my first tank of gas in. It's like 50 cents a gallon or something like that, 45 cents a gallon. Who really cared what your mileage was? You wanted a car that was big, that moved, and what you drove was a statement of who you are and what you were. You do have to know a couple terms, though. Okay, the fastback style. When you start, and I'll show you some pictures in here. When you take a look like the Mustangs and all, the back of the car is going to slide downward, okay? That's called a fastback. It's, I don't know, I'm sure it's aerodynamic or something, but they just looked fast. A GTO, you got to know. Now, that's Pontiac, and a GTO was a car. I mean, there are guys who loved GTOs. Super Sport, that's a Chevy version. Had a good buddy that had an SS Nova. Super Sport Nova. That's basically going to be their souped up Nova. Now, glass packs. Back in those days, you wanted a car that sounded loud as well as was fast. So the mufflers are going to roar. They'll call them cherry bombs or glass packs. But what it was a muffler that had a loud sound to it. And it got attention. When you pounded that gas with those glass packs, everybody heard and knew what you were doing. Couple more things. The wheels were a lot different than today. Back then, you had mag wheels. Mag wheels were big and wide, okay? So you've got frames, like if you look at the Kragers over there in the corner, you've got these big, beautiful frames, and then the tires itself were a lot wider than today. And when you peeled out with those wider tires, boy, you left smoke behind. So back then, the tires on cars, especially the rear ones, were a lot wider. It was a whole different look, different time. But so these are some of the terms you kind of got to know. And again, when you start talking about mag wheels, a lot of people today will look at you like, what? I mean, if you'd have told them back then, hey, they're spinners, where the hubcap spins, they'd look at you like, what the heck? Well, back then, you wanted mags. You wanted big, wide wheels on that rear of your car so they could really move. All right. Each one of the car manufacturing companies realizes that this is a great market. I mean, kids and young people want to buy these cars. And it's a time of, again, the 60s and 70s, Everyone thinks it's the hippie era, but I'm thinking this is the muscle car era where kids wanted to roar. I mean, in high school, I remember kids in the parking lot would drive up and down in their cars, and it was a statement of who you were. And a lot of time it became an identity thing. A lot of the big ones, of course, were the Mustang and the Camaros. Ford versus Chevy. There were people that were Mustang people through and through, and there were Camaro people through and through. My brother-in-law, big Camaro guy. I mean, there are a lot of other cars out there, but that's still around even to this day. Ford recently, if you've noticed all the Mustangs this Ford has brought out now, well, Chevy had to bring a Camaro back, and Dodge had to bring the Charger back. So each one of these has its different cars. They have different looks to them, but again, it was all about the need for speed. And I've got it on the classroom. I'm going to embed a couple links on YouTube so you can actually look at some of these cars. You can see them, hear them, and then hear what made them so special. Dodge was the Charger was really big, but there were people who were big into Challengers too. Pontiac, both the Firebird and the GTO, also known as the Goat. Plymouth, the Barracuda was, you didn't see as many of those around, but there was a kid around here that had a Roadrunner and it was really fast. Each car, again, I don't have AMC up here, but I am going to show you an AMC later, an AMC Javelin, which was their entry into the thing. But right now, those are just names. You look at them and go, what's that? Well, I'll tell you what that is. If you have one of these cars today, that's a lot of money. These things have kept their value. Oh my God. That's because I guess people like me that aren't teachers and poor, but people like me that are older and have money want to buy those things that they couldn't afford as a kid or gave them the identity as a kid. Now they're reaching back to it. So muscle cars are becoming really popular again, and there's still a way of turning ahead. I'm going to tell you right now, you drive down 156th Street in one of these, redone one of these muscle cars, you'll get people's attention. And there's things that people really have special things that they tie to. Remember 442s? Those were a great car. Oh my God! Again, it depends upon what you like. So let's take a look at some of these cars. Let's look at the Mustang first. 64 is the first year that it's manufactured, and there's a picture of it. Now, it's inspired really by the Mustang, the fighter plane from World War II. The lines kind of reflect that. But a Mustang is a horse, a pony that rides really fast on the Texas plain. So if you look at that car, it's smart. There's a movie out there, you probably have seen it, about Ford versus Ferrari and all. Along comes a Texas muscle guy by the name of Carroll Shelby. Shelby had been a race car driver, and he had a serious need for speed. He would go ahead and put a lot of power into Mustangs, and later on he developed something called the Shelby Cobra. I had a friend that had a Cobra. Oh my God, I love that car. Greatest car I ever rode in, ever. Let's take a quick look at different ways. Now, this Ford Mustang right here, if you look at the red on the back, that's the fastback. You see, after the cabin, cockpit, whatever the hell you'd call it, you see the red fins going down. It's kind of like a long line, okay? Look at the first year. The back on the blue there is going to be sharper. As you get going into the 70s there, you're going to get a lot more with the fastback line. And again, Ford Mustangs. You got a 60s Ford Mustang. That's a statement when you get out there and you drive it. Okay? Now the Mustangs are going to step up a little bit more, and wow. The Chevy Camaro. Mustang comes first, and then Chevy Camaro comes out as an answer. Basically, it's their competition. You put a big old V8 engine in it, and that thing can just move. And again, the lines of a Camaro from that era. Look at the lines of that car. That's just beautiful. Now look at the back tires. You see what I'm talking about, the back tire with mag wheels? You've got really wide wheels back there. And that puts a lot of friction down. So when you're stomping on the brake and hitting the gas at the same time, you can get some smoke coming out of that, okay? Now look at the lines of this early Camaro. Beautiful, okay? You add a little bit more to it, I think the beauty of them just comes up. That is a car right there that is meant to drive. It's just beautiful. The Chevelle, a little earlier, it was probably Chevy's their mainstay. Later on, the Malibu replaces it, but it's kind of like their main car. Now, if you want to get a super sport, now that's going to be one that's going to be stepped up. And you've got different options, what type of motors and stuff you could put into it. Here's a picture of a Chevy Chevelle. Holy crud, that looks nice, doesn't it? And again, you'll notice the bigger tires in the back and all the good lines. This right here is a car that I'll never be able to afford. But God, I remember back in the day when you saw those things roaring up and down Dodge Street on a Saturday night, you really noticed them. Dodge, theirs is the Charger, okay? Now, if you look, there's going to be different options. The Daytona, it's going to have the funny fins in the back, Super B and other stuff. But if you've ever watched the Dukes of Hazzard, you're going to recognize the General Lee, okay? There's a movie called Bullet, but we're not going to get into that, but you ought to watch that one too. Now, the first lines, look at the lines. Not the prettiest car, okay? But check that out. As it develops into a muscle car, that was another statement. And again, kids were Dodge people, or they were Chevy, Camaro people, or Mustang. It all depended on what you got into. But the Dodge Chargers had a lot of power. A lot of power. Okay. Look at that. You see the fit on the back there. Obviously, to keep the back down as you're racing, it's going to want to move around. The Challenger is another simple thing. The V8 and the Hemi were just, God, those were motors that put out the horsepower. They just did. And again, look at the Challenger. That is a car that when you saw it, your jaw dropped. Okay, you've got the Firebirds also. These big V8, and if you look at these, this is going to be later on. It's going to start developing, and when we start seeing these things like Smoking the Bandit and Knight Rider and all these things that are later on, this is the roots of it. Look at that car, beautiful car. Oh my God, come on, look at the lines on that car. And that was like, I mean, you're driving those around in the 70s. Holy crud. GTOs, a lot. It all depends, but a lot of people thought that these things had more power, and they were also called kid killers. There's a lot of kids that didn't know how to drive when you had that much speed and wrapped them around stuff. They just really were. But look at that. That is a car. It's got beautiful lines, and again, you have a loud exhaust system on that thing. It just had a roar to it. Beautiful car. Okay, another great car there. GTX. Never ridden one. I would love to say I have, but I haven't. But again, nice car. Okay. Did have a friend in college that had one of these, and it was one of the nicest cars I ever rode in. This thing was just, oh my God, it was incredible. All right, other cars out there I want to throw out there. The Barracuda. Take a look at that. I mean, that's a stylish car, obviously. The Roadrunner, it had a big engine, and it was basically, take a look at it. Now, you saw that. You know you're going to have fun with it. Okay, there you go again. The Corvette has always been the Corvette. Now, this goes way back. Corvette was always a speed car, but they were a lighter car. So a lot of people do not consider the Corvettes a true muscle car. But, I mean, when you look at a Corvette, it does have speed in it. So when you start talking about muscle cars, I think you got to throw a Corvette in the picture just for the fact that, my nephew who has those, he sees this Corvette guy, he just loves riding them. But they're a light car, and you have to be careful with them. When you got a lot of speed and it's a light car, you can have a little bit of problem. I threw this one in because this is the AMC, American Motor Company, their version of the muscle car. They had something called the Javelin. I knew a kid in high school that had a Javelin, and I used to hang out with him just because I loved his car. And he had a Javelin, so I always remember them. You don't see these around so much. The steel wasn't that great in them, and they didn't make as many, or they weren't as popular as the Camaros and the other stuff. All right, so what have we learned? Hopefully, you take a look and see that these cars, and again, I'm just giving you, this is what they look like. This is the basics. I like to say I'm a car guy. I really wish I could say I'm a car guy. But when I was a kid, I couldn't afford any of those. But I did have a car in that era that spoke to me. My first car was a 1970 Ford Galaxie 500. And that thing had an engine like, holy crud. I'm not advocating you guys driving fast. That would be wrong. But it's very possible that that car could be going down the interstate between Omaha and Lincoln, and it's very possible that that car could be cruising at about 90 miles an hour, still have a good 2 inches underneath the pedal. And it was just a nice car. It was a great feeling car. They were bigger cars back then, had a little steel. And if you did get in an accident, like I did, you could get out of the car and walk away from it. Today's cars are so much smaller and lighter, but those cars just crush today, just not like that. So take a quick look at these. On the classroom, we're going to have some links to YouTube videos that'll explain these, let you watch them, drive, and then listen to the horsepower to them. But this is just a quick lesson. I would encourage you kids, please talk to your parents, or if you got aunts or uncles that remember back in the 70s and 80s, ask them what car they thought was best. Ask them what their first car. It's one of those really neat things, but people tend to remember their first car. And a lot of people even named their first car. Ask your parents when you talk to them. Did they have a name for their first car? What did they think about it? And there's kind of a love. This is an era you had a love for your car because your car was a statement of who you were. And it was really a freeing thing to be in a car with that much power to move in on. So a lot of people have connections to the cars, not only that they had, but of their friends and people they associated with. So please talk with your parents about it. And as you look at the pictures, as you look at the YouTube videos, I'm going to put the link, compare them to what we drive around today and see, what do you think? Gonna tell you, kids, I think this era, the 60s and 70s, muscle cars, was the greatest era in American automotive history. It was a glorious time to be alive.